Christmas had always been my favorite time of year. For decades, I had been the one to make it magical, stringing lights around the house, baking cookies until the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and love, wrapping presents with care. The laughter of my grandchildren running through the halls, the warmth of family gathered around our dinner table, the tradition of watching old movies together after the feast. It was everything I lived for during those cold December days. But this year, everything changed with a single phone call. "Hi, Margaret." My daughter-in-law's voice came through the receiver, polite but distant. "I wanted to let you know that we've decided to keep Christmas dinner small this year. Just our immediate family." I felt my heart sink. Small? But I am immediate family. "Well, we just think it would be better this way. Less stress, you know? More intimate." The words hit me like a physical blow. After 30 years of hosting Christmas, of making sure every tradition was perfect, of sacrificing my own comfort to make everyone else happy, I was being cast aside like yesterday's wrapping paper. I had no choice but to stay silent, but inside, I felt the pain of her rejection cutting deep. The days that followed were torture. I replayed the conversation over and over, searching for clues about what I had done wrong. Had I been too involved? Too traditional? Was I becoming the burden that every family dreaded during the holidays? I thought about all the Christmases I had poured my heart into. The year I stayed up until 3 in the morning hand-sewing stockings for each grandchild. The time I drove through a blizzard to make sure their tree was perfect. The countless meals I had prepared, cleaned up after, and never complained about. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, had always been different from me. Modern, independent, full of ideas about how things should be done. I had tried to respect her ways, even when they clashed with the traditions I held dear. I had bitten my tongue when she criticized my cooking, stayed quiet when she rolled her eyes at my stories. But this felt like more than just a difference of opinion. This felt like cruelty. What she didn't know was that my silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. As I sat in my empty house, staring at the Christmas decorations I had put up out of habit, I began to think about everything I had quietly provided over the years. The down payment for their house, that had come from my savings account. The family vacations they took every summer, the ones Jessica posted about on social media with such pride, I had made those possible. The beautiful furniture in their living room, the new car they drove, even the expensive private school tuition for my grandchildren. All of it traced back to my silent contributions. I had never asked for recognition or gratitude. I had simply given because that's what mothers and grandmothers do. But Jessica had no idea. She thought their comfortable lifestyle was all due to my son's hard work and her careful budgeting. She had no clue that behind every major purchase, every family milestone, every moment of financial security, stood my quiet support. For years, I had watched her take credit for things my money had made possible. I had listened to her give advice to friends about financial planning, all while living off my generosity. It was time to let her see the truth. Jessica's independence had always been her defining characteristic. She prided herself on being a modern woman who didn't need anyone's help. She made sure everyone knew how she had transformed their family's fortunes through her smart decisions and forward-thinking approach. But there was an arrogance to it that had grown over the years. She spoke to me like I was out of touch, irrelevant, a relic from a bygone era who couldn't possibly understand how things worked in today's world. She dismissed my opinions, ignored my suggestions, and treated my traditions like outdated customs that needed to be discarded. At family gatherings, she would interrupt my stories to correct details that didn't matter. She would steer conversations away from topics I brought up. She made me feel like a guest in my own family, tolerated but not truly welcome. The Christmas exclusion wasn't just about wanting a smaller celebration. It was about power. It was her way of showing everyone that she was now the matriarch, that my time had passed, that my role in the family was no longer necessary. But what she didn't know was that her arrogance would cost her dearly. My son, Thomas, had been unusually quiet during these weeks leading up to Christmas. I knew he wasn't blind to what was happening. He saw the way his wife treated me, heard the dismissive tone in her voice when she spoke about my ideas or concerns. But Thomas had always chosen the path of least resistance. He loved Jessica and he loved me, and he seemed to believe that if he just stayed out of the conflict, everything would work itself out. He was conflict averse, always had been, even as a child. I watched him during family dinners, saw the tension in his shoulders when Jessica would make cutting remarks about my old-fashioned ways. I saw him change the subject when conversations became uncomfortable, redirect attention when emotions ran high. He knew the truth about our family's finances. He knew where the money had come from for their house, their vacations, their children's education. But he had never corrected Jessica when she took credit, never spoke up to defend my contributions. I wasn't going to wait forever. The truth needed to come out. The breaking point came 3 days before Christmas. I was at their house, dropping off gifts for my grandchildren. Gifts I wasn't going to be there to see them open when I overheard Jessica on the phone with her sister. "Oh, we're finally doing Christmas our way this year," she was saying, her voice full of satisfaction. No more of Thomas's mother hovering over everything, telling us how things should be done. It's so much more relaxing without all that pressure. Thomas walked into the room just as she said this. I saw his face change, saw something harden in his expression that I had never seen before. He looked at his wife, then at me standing in the doorway, and I could see the moment he made his decision. "Jessica," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "we need to talk." That evening, after the children were in bed, my son finally found his courage. He looked at his wife across their beautiful dining room table, the one I had bought them for their anniversary, and said the words that would change everything. "You don't know who's been funding all of this. Our house, our vacations. It's my mother's money." Her smirk disappeared as the weight of her mistake hit her. The next morning, Jessica appeared at my door. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her usual confident composure completely shattered. She stood on my porch looking smaller than I had ever seen her, clutching a tissue in her trembling hands. "Margaret, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice breaking. "I had no idea. I didn't know about the money, about everything you've done for us. Thomas told me everything last night, and I feel horrible." She kept apologizing, over and over, as if words alone could undo years of dismissiveness and disrespect. "I didn't realize what you'd sacrificed for our family. I thought we had built everything ourselves. I was so wrong." I stood in my doorway, looking at this woman who had made me feel unwelcome in my own family, and felt a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. There was satisfaction in seeing her humbled, certainly. But there was also sadness at how it had taken this revelation to make her see me as a person worthy of respect. Her apology felt hollow, not because I doubted her sincerity, but because it had taken the shock of learning about my financial contributions to make her realize how poorly she had treated me. I wasn't sure if words alone could make it right. 2 days later, I called both Jessica and Thomas and asked them to come over. "We need to have a serious conversation about what happened and where we go from here," I told them. They arrived looking nervous and uncertain. Jessica sat on the edge of the couch, still wearing that shell-shocked expression she'd had since learning the truth. Thomas looked guilty and ashamed, finally understanding the cost of his years of silence. "I want you both to understand something," I began, choosing my words carefully. "This isn't about money. It's about respect. It's about being valued for who I am, not just what I can provide." I looked directly at Jessica. "You made me feel like I was a burden to this family. You acted like my traditions were silly, my opinions worthless, my presence unwelcome. The money just makes your attitude more painful, but it wasn't the root of the problem." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I should have said something sooner. I should have stood up for you." "Yes, you should have," I replied. A family works when everyone's contributions are acknowledged and respected. I've felt invisible in my own family for years. The tension in the room was thick. The future of our family depended on what happened next. I spent the next hour explaining everything to them. The sacrifices I had made over the years, the money I had quietly provided, the support I had given without ever asking for recognition. I told them about the times I had gone without so they could have more, the dreams I had deferred so I could invest in their future. "You've both taken so much for granted. I said, my voice steady but firm. Jessica, you built your identity around being independent and successful, but you were living off my generosity. Thomas, you let your wife treat me poorly because it was easier than confronting the problem. I watched Jessica's face as the full scope of my contributions became clear. She had no idea that the life she was so proud of building had been made possible by my silent support. The realization was clearly devastating to her sense of self. I'm not saying this to hurt you, I continued. I'm saying it because if we're going to rebuild our relationship, it has to be based on honesty and mutual respect. Thomas nodded slowly. You're right, Mom. We've been unfair to you. Jessica looked at me with what seemed like genuine remorse. I've been so blind. I see that now. Would this be the wake-up call she needed? We talked for hours that day. It wasn't easy. There were tears, raised voices, and uncomfortable silences. But it felt necessary, like lancing a wound that had been festering for too long. Jessica admitted that she had felt threatened by my role in the family. I wanted to be the one making the decisions, setting the tone. I felt like you were always judging the way I did things, like I could never measure up to your standards. I was never judging you, I replied. I was just trying to maintain the traditions that had held our family together for generations. I wanted to share that with you, not impose it on you. Thomas finally found his voice. I was a coward. I could see what was happening, but I was afraid that taking sides would make things worse. I thought if I stayed neutral, eventually you two would work it out on your own. Neutrality isn't possible when someone is being treated unfairly, I told him. Sometimes you have to choose what's right over what's comfortable. By the end of the conversation, we had all acknowledged our failures. But acknowledgement was just the first step. We can fix this, Thomas said hopefully. We can do better. I wasn't convinced, but I had to try for the sake of the family. Christmas Eve arrived, and with it came an unexpected invitation. Jessica called me that morning, her voice hesitant but hopeful. Margaret, would you like to come help us prepare for tomorrow? I know it's late notice, and I know I have no right to ask, but I'd like you to show me how you used to do the Christmas decorations. The way your mother taught you. It was such a complete reversal from her earlier dismissal of my traditions that I was momentarily speechless. Are you sure? I asked. I'm sure, she replied. I want to learn. I want the children to experience Christmas the way Thomas did when he was growing up. I arrived at their house that afternoon to find Jessica had taken down all the decorations they had put up and was waiting for me with boxes of ornaments, including some that had belonged to my mother and grandmother, ones I had given them years ago that I thought had been forgotten. We spent the day redecorating together. I showed her how to arrange the nativity scene, taught her the proper way to string lights on the tree, shared the stories behind each family ornament. Was this the genuine change I had hoped for, or just a temporary fix? Christmas Eve felt different that year. Instead of the tense, walking on eggshells atmosphere that had characterized our recent family gatherings, there was something that felt almost like the old days. Jessica had clearly put thought into making me feel welcome. She asked for my help with the meal preparation, deferred to my judgment about timing and seasoning, even requested that I share the family stories that went along with each dish. That evening, as we sat around their beautifully decorated tree, decorated with a mixture of old traditions and new touches, Jessica handed me a small wrapped box. This isn't much, she said, looking nervous. But I wanted you to have something to remember this day. Inside was a simple silver ornament engraved with the words, "In appreciation of all you've given our family." It wasn't expensive, but the thought behind it touched me deeply. She had also written a card, and when I opened it, I found a handwritten letter that was clearly from her heart. "I'm sorry for everything," she had written. "I've learned so much about what family really means, and I promise to do better." Could this apology make up for the years of hurt? Christmas Day was unlike any we had shared in recent memory. Instead of feeling like an outsider being tolerated at my own family celebration, I felt truly included. Jessica made sure I was involved in every aspect of the day, from helping the grandchildren open their gifts to sharing stories about Christmases past. The children, my beautiful grandchildren, seemed to sense that something had changed. They climbed into my lap to hear stories, asked me to help them with their new toys, begged for just one more Christmas cookie from the batch I had made. Jessica worked hard to include me in every conversation, every activity, every moment of the day. She asked about my childhood Christmases, wanted to hear about their father's early years, listened attentively to stories she had previously dismissed as old-fashioned rambling. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in my own family again. But even as I enjoyed the day, part of me wondered, was this really the beginning of something new, or just a fleeting moment of guilt-induced kindness that would fade once the shock of the revelation wore off? In the weeks that followed Christmas, I watched Jessica carefully for signs of genuine change. The real test wasn't how she acted on Christmas Day, when the hurt was fresh and her guilt was overwhelming. The real test was whether this new attitude would last once life returned to normal. To my surprise and relief, Jessica continued to treat me with a respect and consideration that had been missing for years. When she called me, it wasn't because she needed something, it was to check on me, to ask for advice, or simply to chat about her day. She started inviting me to family events again, not as an afterthought or obligation, but as someone whose presence she genuinely wanted. She asked for my opinions and actually listened to my answers. She stopped interrupting my stories and started encouraging the grandchildren to pay attention when I spoke. Most importantly, she looked at me differently. Where once I had seen dismissal or barely concealed irritation in her eyes, now I saw something that looked like respect, even admiration. But I knew the real test was still ahead. The full truth about my financial contributions to the family came out gradually over the following months. Thomas had initially only told Jessica about the major things, the house down payment, the vacation funding, but as time went on, more details emerged. The private school tuition I had been paying for years. The medical bills I had covered when Thomas was between jobs. The car payments I had taken over when they were struggling with their budget. The emergency fund I had built up for them, the one they didn't even know existed. "We never would have had the life we do without you," Thomas finally admitted to his wife one evening, and she realized it was even more extensive than she had originally understood. "Mom has been our silent partner all along, and we never even acknowledged it." Jessica was shocked to learn just how deep my support had gone. "I had no idea," she kept saying. "I thought we were doing so well on our own. I was so proud of what we had built together, but it wasn't really us at all." The recognition was gratifying, but it also made me sad. I hadn't given all that support because I wanted recognition. I had given it because I loved my family and wanted them to succeed. Was this acknowledgement enough for the years of silent support I had given? As winter turned to spring, I began to see changes in Jessica that went deeper than just politeness or guilt-driven kindness. She started to understand not just what I had done for the family financially, but what it meant to sacrifice for the people you love. When her own mother fell ill and needed care, Jessica called me for advice. "How did you always manage to put everyone else first?" she asked. "How did you find the strength to keep giving when it must have been so hard sometimes?" It was the kind of conversation we had never had before, one where she saw me not as an outdated relic, but as someone who had wisdom worth seeking. She started showing gratitude for small things too. When I brought dinner during a particularly busy week, she didn't just say thank you. She told me how much it meant to have someone looking out for her family. When I offered to babysit so she and Thomas could have a date night, she hugged me and said it was the best gift anyone could give her. The change felt genuine, but I had been hurt too deeply to trust it completely. Would her gratitude last, or would she fall back into old habits once life got complicated again? By summer, something had shifted between us so fundamentally that we rarely needed to discuss what had happened at Christmas. We both understood that we had moved into new territory, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation or tolerance. Jessica started asking me to be part of family decisions, not just consulted, but truly involved. When they were planning the children's summer activities, she wanted my input. When they were considering a family vacation, she asked for my advice about destinations. She also started sharing things with me that she had never shared before, her worries about the children, her concerns about balancing work and family, her hopes for the future. She treated me like someone whose opinion mattered, whose experience had value. One evening, as we sat on her back porch watching the grandchildren play in the yard, she said quietly, "I wasted so many years fighting against you when I should have been learning from you." There was no drama in the moment, no tearful apology or grand gesture. Just a simple acknowledgement of what had been lost and what we had found. Was this peace, or was it just the calm before the storm? The real test of our new relationship came when Jessica faced a crisis at work. Her company was downsizing, and her job was at risk. In the past, she would have handled this stress by becoming more controlling at home, more critical of everyone around her, more determined to prove her independence. But this time was different. This time, she came to me. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, sitting at my kitchen table with tears in her eyes. "If I lose this job, I don't know how we'll manage the mortgage, the kids' expenses, everything." She was vulnerable with me in a way she had never been before, asking for guidance rather than trying to figure everything out on her own. We talked through her options, considered different scenarios, and I was able to offer both practical advice and emotional support. It was the kind of conversation I had always hoped to have with her, one where she saw me as an ally rather than an obstacle. Would she continue to turn to me when times were tough, or would she only need me during this particular crisis? As much as our relationship had improved, I would be lying if I said all the old tensions had completely disappeared. There were still moments when I saw flashes of Jessica's old attitude. The impatience, the dismissiveness, the need to be in control. During a family barbecue in late summer, Jessica snapped at me when I suggested a different way to arrange the food table. For a moment, I saw that familiar look in her eyes, the one that said I was being difficult and old-fashioned. But then something interesting happened. She caught herself, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm sorry. You're right. Your way is better." It was a small moment, but it showed me that she was genuinely trying to change, even when it was difficult. The progress wasn't always linear. There were still bumps, still moments of friction. But now we both had the tools to address problems instead of letting them fester. Was this progress, or were we about to fall back into the same old patterns? The real turning point came in September, completely unexpectedly. I was at home one evening when Jessica called, and instead of her usual cheerful greeting, she was crying. "Margaret, I need to apologize to you again," she said through her tears. "Not just for Christmas, but for everything. For years of treating you like you were in my way instead of recognizing that you were the foundation holding us all up." This wasn't prompted by a crisis or a revelation. This was just Jessica, reflecting on our relationship and feeling the weight of how she had treated me. "I keep thinking about all the times I dismissed you, all the times I made you feel unwelcome in your own family," she continued. "I was so worried about being seen as a good wife and mother that I forgot you weren't my competition. You were my example." This apology felt different from the others. It wasn't driven by shock or guilt, but by genuine understanding and remorse. Could this truly be the turning point I had been waiting for? Over the following months, we worked together to rebuild not just our relationship, but the entire family dynamic. The Christmas crisis had exposed problems that went far beyond Jessica and me. It had shown us that we had all taken each other for granted in different ways. Thomas began taking a more active role in managing family conflicts instead of avoiding them. The grandchildren, sensing the improved atmosphere, started spending more time with all of us together instead of feeling like they had to choose sides. We developed new traditions that honored the old ones while making space for new ideas. Jessica learned to make my mother's Christmas cookies, but she also introduced some of her own family's recipes. We kept the nativity scene and traditional ornaments, but we also added new decorations that reflected our growing and changing family. Most importantly, we were all more intentional about showing appreciation for each other. We didn't take contributions for granted anymore, whether they were financial, practical, or emotional. Was this the family we were meant to be all along? Trust, once broken, is not easily rebuilt. But slowly, consistently, Jessica proved that her change was real and lasting. She took on more responsibility for maintaining family relationships, reaching out to relatives, organizing gatherings, carrying on traditions. She started asking me to teach her things, not just cooking and decorating, but life skills like budgeting, investing, and planning for the future. She wanted to learn from my experience rather than dismiss it. When the grandchildren had problems or needed advice, Jessica would often say, "Let's ask Grandma. She has good ideas about these things." She was actively working to rebuild my role in the family as someone whose wisdom was valued. She also began contributing more to our relationship. Instead of me always being the one who called, who initiated plans, who made the effort, she started reciprocating. She would invite me to lunch, suggest activities we could do together, check on me when I was feeling under the weather. Was this the new beginning I had been hoping for? The real test of how much had changed came when Jessica faced a major decision about her career. She had been offered a promotion that would require more travel and longer hours, but would also provide more financial security for the family. In the past, she would have made this decision on her own, perhaps consulting Thomas, but certainly not involving me in the discussion. But this time was different. "I want to talk this through with you," she said when she called to tell me about the opportunity. "I value your perspective, and I want to make sure I'm considering all the angles." We spent hours talking through the pros and cons, the impact on the family, the long-term implications for everyone. She genuinely wanted my input, not just my blessing for a decision she had already made. When she ultimately decided to take the promotion, she made sure I knew how much our conversation had helped her think it through. "I couldn't have made this decision without your guidance," she told me. Would she continue to seek my wisdom, or would this just be a temporary phase? By the time the holidays approached again, a full year after the Christmas that had nearly broken our family apart, I could see how much we had all grown. Jessica had proven, through consistent actions over many months, that her change was genuine and lasting. She planned that year's Christmas celebration with me from the very beginning, asking what traditions were most important to me, making sure I felt central to the festivities rather than peripheral. But she also contributed her own ideas, and we created something that felt both familiar and fresh. The grandchildren, now more aware of family dynamics, made sure to include me in everything. They had clearly been influenced by their mother's new attitude toward me, and they treated me with the respect and affection I had always hoped for. Thomas, too, had learned from the previous year's crisis. He was more attentive to family dynamics, more willing to speak up when he saw problems developing, more appreciative of all the contributions everyone made to our family's success. Could this change really last, or would we always have the shadow of the past hanging over us? That Christmas was unlike any other we had ever shared. The bonds between us were stronger than they had ever been, forged not just by blood and history, but by mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Jessica had not only earned her place back in the family, she had earned mine as well. She had shown me that I was valued not just for what I could provide, but for who I was. She had learned to see my traditions not as obstacles to her own vision, but as gifts to be treasured and passed down. As we sat around the tree that evening, watching the grandchildren play with their gifts and listening to Thomas tell stories about Christmases past, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. The crisis that had nearly torn us apart had ultimately made us stronger. We had learned to communicate honestly, to appreciate each other's contributions, and to build a family dynamic based on respect rather than expectation. Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for never giving up on us." As I looked around at my family, truly my family now, in every sense of the word, I knew that no matter what challenges we might face in the future, we would face them together.